Contemplation is really about focusing on spiritual things. It's about mystical awareness. It's about knowing and not knowing and putting those two together. In psychology, we put uncertainty and certainty together. So these are just other words, other ways of saying it. So the word contemplation basically means that we are thinking deeply, or focusing intently on something before we take action in our lives. So it is the pause before we take actions. Now, that's a big deal for people if you are doing what you don't want to do in your life. If you wake up every day and are not doing what you need to do, or you are doing negative things, then this pause that contemplation will bring is going to be very, very important for you. St. Paul put it very well in his letter to the Romans when he said, "For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law that it is good. So now it is no longer I who do it, but ego that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is my flesh." So flesh was just another word for ego, or lower self in the old days. So Paul is having a tussle, as most people do, with a higher self wanting to do some things and achieve some things in his life. But he seems to be kept from doing it and says, "I do the very things I hate." And that is what we are referring to here simply as ego. And it is important to distinguish between your ego or your shadow or your lower self and then your higher self, your spiritual self, or as we call it here, your sacred self. So there's a part of our minds that we have to practice. Like we practice gym, we need to practice training our minds more today than ever before. So we need to look at our lives with a different set of eyes and really pause to notice, to check what is true, to see how we actually feel intuitively, and then only move on into action from there. So that is perfect balance of your brain, and not doing these things is costing us. As we rush into a busier life, our emotions and mental states are taking more and more of a knock. Contemplative neuroscience really accesses two parts of our brains and even makes our brain bigger. It reactivates the growth of our brain. The prefrontal cortex is one of them, which is the CEO of our brains. It's also called your executive brain. And the second part is the insular brain, which is related to empathy, which is very, very important in our CQ work. And the second part of that is body. It is an insular brain is looking after your body. And your body, we believe, is where the memory is stored. From 50,000 papers on research, our bodies are where we store our emotions at the very least, and our trauma. And that's why you see trauma on the body. And that's where it manifests itself. So the research has led us to believe that if we're connecting the body back to the mind, we can create something new. That includes, without getting too technical, it includes a genealogy, meaning that only 5% of your life expectancy, your probability of attracting diseases and so on, only 5% of that can be turned on or off by your genes. So what we do with our body and mind in terms of training and exercise is pretty important. So contemplation is not working on habit. It is working on new experience. If we don't have what we want something new. And for that to happen, obviously things need to change. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And that essentially is contemplative practice. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see, is re-looking at the world. So when we say someone has awakened, or they've become fully conscious, or they've had a born-again experience, or a satora, instant awakening, whatever it might be, they are saying these people become more conscious, they heal and grow, and they are also able to see things the way they are, so in a new light. And I think that is an essential part of being a human being, is to divide, as Carl Jung would say, the first and second halves of life. The way you see the first half of life is very different to the way you can see the second half of life. The second half of life really is about becoming more and more conscious, and to be able to see and feel things that include big subjects like death, transformation, life, rebirth, philosophy, and reality. So anytime we are contemplative, we are keeping it simple. We are looking at the sky and wondering where the stars came from, why some become supernovas and others disappear and explode, why your child is the way they are, why they are here and why they are growing. If you contemplate those questions again with a mature mind, you are practicing contemplation. So when you are looking at water again and you start noticing water, and that you're made up of 75% of it, and it is something that gives life to everyone, and you start looking at why this is and what it's about, you are practicing contemplation. So you are re-wondering about existence and truth, as opposed to walking around saying, I do not notice the tree, the path, the flower, because it's already there. So for a lot of people, it is one of the most beautiful experiences that life can offer. To re-emerge and reawaken is 100% part of life. And we say that this emerging is normally preceded by a great fall. And there is always a recovery from that fall. And we think that is because of being able to experience the world with new eyes. So for most people, whenever they are about to do something, the process begins with action. And we learn through experience, through stumbling and falling, and sometimes breaking, that we don't get our way. And some people have a bad deal, it seems, when nothing ever seems to work. So contemplation is really a new way of first considering a helicopter view, a real perspective of what is going on. And it is almost like a second thought, and not just using the first thought. So it is really a quite down-to-earth and practical process, this process of contemplation. So even though it's called contemplative neuroscience, contemplative intelligence, it is really about self-directed evolution, and is about the introspection that we can actually make changes on our brain through this introspection. We can change our neurons, we can change our connections, we can become more aware of our feelings, we can actually change the anatomy of the brain, we can grow gray matter in a different part of our brain just from being self-directed. And these are probably the most interesting times to live. So introspection is something that can really focus people on what they need rather than running around in circles, creating nothing but the same experiences that they've had in the past. Our analytical, oppositional mind is not very good at progress. It's not good at problem solving. And the problem is if we are still run around directed by our egos, we are not going to get very far, and we are going to be bad at problem solving. So we quickly move from being fear-driven to being love-drawn when you move from ego consciousness to simple soul awareness. Finally, a sense of centeredness and calmness is what the brain needs. It's certainty. So when we are certain, we move. So practicing meditation, focused thought, time in nature, CQ journaling, contemplative arts, whatever it's going to be, understand that from that space, your creativity, your values, your empathy are all activated. When you're aware that that's happening, you can direct whatever comes next. If you're expecting to heal or to progress, self-actualize yourself, if you want to overcome anxiety, depression, traumas of the past, every possible tool that's going to help you is exactly the same. They are all going to try and help you change your neurochemistry. And that is something that neuroscience says you can self-direct. You can evolve, change from a state of installing new software and getting back into those two parts of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, with a CEO taking over the job of the brain as it should be. And then looking at influencing our insular brains, which are in our body, in our awareness. We will be able to heal from that place by becoming more conscious. And becoming more conscious is simply becoming more aware of what reality is. And reality is always kind, because in reality, we are well. And the old saints and sages would say, all is well. And that is the secret to the universe.